Today we're going to be picking up where we left off. We had Easter last week, but we're going back to the book of Joshua now. And where we had been, Israel had run into a bit of a rough patch, hit a few snags. There was that initial defeat at Ai in the battle that happened there because of the sin of Achan, how he had kept some of the things that were supposed to be dedicated to God, and so Israel as a community had to take responsibility for that and fix it. But then right after that, there was the deception of Gibeon and how they convinced the Israelites that they were from far away because Joshua was really too caught up thinking about the other Canaanites in a battle he was going to have to fight for them. And so they made that treaty without asking God if they should, and then found out that they were very nearby. And so things have worked out with both of these situations, but it isn't smooth sailing. They need to get back on track, which means they need to see things God's way. That's what it's going to depend upon, trusting on Him to provide rather than stressing like everything is on their shoulders. And we live in a very rushed age, and so that's a valuable lesson for us too. God gives us the time that we need to do what He calls us to do. And so we can rely on Him for that. We can make hay while the sun is shining without worrying about it going down. And this is what we pick up in Joshua chapter 10. That's where we're going to be today. And so if you have your Bibles and have not already opened up there, go ahead and do that now. But if you don't, if you didn't bring a Bible, we do have some over on the counter there. Or of course, you can even pull out your phone, search for Joshua chapter 10, where we're going to be starting with verse 1. It came to pass when Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had taken Ai and how had utterly destroyed it, as he had done to Jericho and its king, so he had done to Ai and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, that they feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were mighty. Therefore Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, sent Ahiam, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish, and Deber, king of Eglon, saying, Come up to me and help me, that we may attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the children of Israel. And therefore the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered together and went up, they and all their armies, and camped before Gibeon and made war against it. And the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp of Gilgal, saying, Do not forsake your servants. Come up to us quickly, save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the mountains have gathered together against us. So now this is going back to what we saw at the start of the last message that we had in Joshua. After the Battle of Ai, the Canaanites started to band together. But it wasn't just because, or primarily because of what Joshua had been afraid of, that the initial success of Ai was going to embolden them. What we see here is actually it was their defeat. That was why Jerusalem's king was worried here. He saw the only hope for the Canaanites being what Ben Franklin would eventually say. We all have to hang together in order to not hang separately. And that's what he's looking at. And he was right to be afraid. But he is also angry. And that's the other element here. There's a reason why the Canaanites move against Gibeon first. Aside from the obvious, they didn't want a direct confrontation with Israel yet. And so this was a way to potentially harm them without hitting them, to take a piece off the board. If it's an ally of Israel and they remove them, then Israel will be weakened. But more than that, this is actually revenge. Gibeon was a considerable loss to their strength. To kind of put it in maybe a little bit more of a local term for us, it would kind of be like the relationship that Pittsburgh has to Philadelphia is what Gibeon was to Jerusalem, where Ai would be more like Greensburg, I guess we could kind of compare it to. And so for them to just switch sides to Israel was a huge loss and a huge betrayal. A betrayal of their nation, a betrayal of their gods. And so the other Canaanites wanted to hurt them for that. And along with that, probably were hoping to discourage other cities from trying anything similar. And so they go against Gibeon and besiege it. And the Gibeonites are understandably terrified by this, and so they call on Israel for help. Now, stop for a second and consider the magnitude of them doing that. Remember, their treaty's new. It's probably only been a couple of weeks since they made it. That also meant that their connection to the Lord was new. So they could have told all the other Canaanites, We regret it. We didn't mean it. We were just doing what we needed to in order to try to survive, but we're willing to come right back into the fold with you. They could have tried to do whatever it took in order to save their own skins again, but they don't. They lean into their new relationships. They request Israel's help, which of course is really requesting God's. But Gibeon is not the only one with a question of loyalty here. There's also one for Israel. The treaty's new for them too. And this was a chance to get out of it. They never should have made that treaty in the first place. It was against God's command. Having sworn by his name, they couldn't break it. We talked about that last time. But God could take care of it. And they might have thought, well, this is how he's going to do it. He's going to have all the other Canaanites turn against them. This is going to solve our problem for us. All we have to do is stay out of the way. And also, to kind of tie along with that, consider the fact that they had to wonder where they stood in relation to God at this point. We took a positive view of Joshua chapter 9 because, again, like always, we're looking at it in hindsight. We were able to see the things that happened in the weeks, even in the centuries that followed, and that God did end up supporting the Gibeonites along with the Israelites. At this point, they don't know any of that. God, in fact, did not speak at all in Joshua chapter 9 because, again, he hadn't been asked to, and that was the problem. They didn't go to him for his opinion, and so they didn't get it. They still don't have it. They don't know if maybe judgment is still incoming for having formed that treaty. They don't know if going and fighting for Gibeon is going to bring that upon them. So they have to face this question. Gibeon has called, should we go? The answer to that is then what follows, starting at verse 7. Joshua ascended from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have delivered them into your hand. Not a man of them shall stand before you. Joshua therefore came upon them suddenly, having marched all night from Gilgal. So the Lord routed them before Israel, killed them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, chased them along the road that goes to Beth Horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And it happened as they fled before Israel and were on the descent of Beth Horon that the Lord cast large hailstones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died from the hailstones than the children of Israel killed with the sword. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Aijalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Joshua? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. And there has been no day like that, before it or after it, that the Lord heeded the voice of a man. For the Lord fought for Israel. And then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal. Going back to the start of that with verse 7, Joshua did go when Gibeon called. He recognized it was the right thing to do. He didn't want to be responsible for discouraging faith in the Lord, which is what would happen if they just ignored this. So even if there was suffering as a result, he wasn't going to take a loophole in order to get out of it. And so it's confirmed for him, though, that he did the right thing. We see that especially in the miracles. That tends to be a lot of the focus of this chapter. But before we even get to that point, just want to pay attention to these early lessons about Gibeon and Israel, how the Gibeonites, like them, Christians can be punished by the world for giving up old loyalties. The relationships that we have with people, that they feel betrayed if we are going to church and if we are living in our just daily lives trying to follow Christ rather than doing what we used to do, friends and family can feel like we have given up on them, and there can be some anger that forms out of that. And because of that, because of the hurt that we feel, there's a temptation to go backward. To say, well, how much does it really matter? I guess I can just do this in order to get along with everybody else. It's the ground of compromise that so much of our society calls us to, without recognizing that our loyalty is supposed to be to the Lord first. And so in order to do that, in order to cure that temptation, we need to turn to prayer. Again, that's essentially what the Gibeonites did. Asking for Israel's help was asking for God's help. That's what we have to do too. is to go to him, rely on him, rather than on anything that is of this world. And then in this world, one of the most important ways we do that is leaning into the relationships of others who have the faith that we do. To be able to connect with them, to grow with them, to experience life with other Christians who are going to be committed as we are to doing the Lord's will, so that we can be improving, and so that we can therefore be a more effective witness to those other people so that they can be with us rather than trying to drag us back to their level. But and of course, it's not just Gibeon, it's also Israel. We want to be like them too, here at least, because they've done much better than the last couple times we've looked at them. They're fully faithful in this story. And it ties into what James would eventually say. In James chapter 4, verse 17, he said, "Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin." We shouldn't be looking for loopholes. We should be trying to do the right thing by seeking God's complete will, not just trying to do the bare minimum. And then in all cases, however we're looking at things, we need to be trusting in the Lord to give us victory, because he is the source of it. That's what he does here in Joshua. Reminds him not to be afraid. Again, just so much the constant refrain of this book. Confirms his promises to be with Joshua and with Israel, and speaks of the battle as being as good as over, because he will fight for them. Because as always, the battle is the Lord's. Now Israel fought it. That was what was expected of them. And so you have this overnight march, which is clever. They take the enemy by surprise. They are there way quicker than they expected them to have been, and they hit them from behind. And then they fight hard all day long. But God did far more to secure the victory, raining down that hail on the Canaanites that ended up devastating them more than the actual fighting did. And of course, even what fighting Israel did, God enabled. The other miracle here, the stopping of the sun. Now, this is, of course, one of the most difficult miracles in the Bible to make sense of. And there's a number of theories put forward on it. The one that would be considered the kind of the most obvious or the most literal to what the text says is that the sun and moon did actually stop in the sky, which, of course, from our vantage point, what we understand about the movements of the heavenly bodies is that that would have been the earth actually stopping, the rotation. It was not spinning on its axis while this was taking place. So that's one possibility. Another is that God provided light supernaturally. And so it continued to be bright in the sky, though it didn't really impact what the earth itself was doing. And so the sun out in space did still set, essentially, or again, the earth turned around so that it did so, but it was still bright enough to fight. A third possibility, though, is actually as a matter of translation, and I'm not going to get in the weeds on this, but just you can really change what this says with a few subtle tweaks that make it so that rather than Joshua asking for the sun to stop in the sky and provide light, he was actually asking for it to be covered. And so the logic on that is that after that overnight march, Israel's very tired. And the sun's beating down on them. And so Joshua's basically asking, Lord, take the sun away so that we can keep fighting. And they also say one of the things that goes towards that as a possibility is the storm. That was what God did. And he provided that storm that brought the hail that killed the Canaanites. And so there's a possibility too. And yet another one is that it's purely figurative. It's Joshua calling on the sun and moon to be witnesses to Israel's victory. Stop, pay attention, look at us with what we are going to do. And so that is possible. Now, I have my own opinion on this. I do think that an actual miracle occurred. And I don't think, like I talk about that trick of translation, I don't think that's super strong. I don't think that was what was happening. I don't think cloud cover explains it. And again, I really don't think that the figurative is why they would be so emphatic in writing this. If it was just about sun and moon, pay attention, I don't think that would even really have been recorded. So I do think that there's some type of miracle where light is being provided. I don't think that God would have had to go as far as stopping the Earth's rotation. There'd be a lot of complications on that. It is simpler, and so if we just take kind of an Occam's razor approach to it, the simplest explanation is usually the best one. Some type of lingering brightness, I think probably is the one that's going to be the most logical in this particular case. But any of them are actually possible. They do all fit the context. They are all ultimately biblical. We just don't know which one of them happens to be true. If any of them, maybe there is something else that fits all the evidence better and I just didn't come across. Really, though, they're not the point. It's bigger than the event of the miracle. There's a reason why the author of Joshua writes this down, and it's not really to celebrate the stopping of the sun. It's to celebrate the fact that God listened to Joshua. That's what he says was so unique in this event. Joshua and the Israelites wanted time to do what God called them to do. And because they asked for it, God gave it to them. He answered their prayer. One way or another, he enabled their victory. That's the miracle. It is a great one, and it actually points to an even greater one. If we look ahead to John chapter 12, starting at verse 27. Jesus is speaking there and says, "Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven, saying, "I have both glorified it and will glorify it again." Therefore the people who stood by and heard it said that it had thundered, and others said, "An angel has spoken to him." Jesus answered and said, "This voice did not come because of me, but for your sake. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself." This he said, signifying by what death he would die. The people answered him, "We have heard from the law that the Christ remains forever. How can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man?" And then Jesus said to them, "A little while longer the light is with you. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness overtake you. He who walks in darkness does not know where he is going. While you have the light, believe in the light, that you may become sons of light." And these things Jesus spoke and departed and was hidden from them. In John chapter 12, it's actually only about halfway through the book, but Jesus is already nearing the end of his ministry, and he predicts his crucifixion here. We talked about that for Easter last week too, the multiple times that Jesus did this, talking about his death and his burial and his resurrection. This is another example of that. Him being lifted up is talking about being put on the cross. And so that's the first meaning that he has in mind when he's talking about using the light while it lasted. He's telling those people who are part of this story that he's only going to be with them a little bit longer. So they needed to pay attention, to live out of what he came to teach. But there's more to it than that, because what is even more important is what he came to do. Death's darkness would put out his light. It would not be able to keep it out. And 3 days later, there was going to be the dawn of the resurrection that never stops shining, offering sight and direction to all those who believe in him. And so he was not only lifted up on the cross, he was also lifted out of the tomb and then lifted to heaven in his ascension, where he now shines forever. And so that is the Son who truly does not go down, S-O-N, the Son of God. But it is still, sadly, possible for people to remain in the shadows. And that's the other meaning that he's talking about. To use the light while they have it. Because they only have so much time to get out. And if they don't do so before their final day, then they are choosing eternal night. So we need to make the most of our opportunities. And that does start with choosing Christ's light, choosing his life. But then also it means pursuing more than the bare minimum. Again, going back to how the Israelites went to Gibeon when they were called. That's how we're supposed to live too. And we can tie that into what we find in Matthew chapter 9, starting at verse 35. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were weary and scattered like sheep having no shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, "The harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." There's only so much that each of us can do, but we should do it. That's what he's saying here. We have to pray for light like Joshua did. Pray for light, to tie it into what Jesus is saying, to be able to work the fields. All of that mixed metaphor is just to say it's pray for time. Pray for opportunities to be able to go out and share the gospel. And so that does mean, of course, praying for people who are doing that work in a major way, who are truly called to it and dedicating their lives to it, to pray that there will be more of them, to pray that they will find success. But it is also about praying to join them, to everyone to take part in that work of spreading God's good news. And it doesn't mean you're going to fill stadiums with people to do that. If you can, great. Absolutely. Take that opportunity. But each of us has something that we can do as part of this effort. Family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, people that can be reached. And we're supposed to engage in that, to take that time that God gives us with them to let them know that they can have eternity. Now, yes, we can struggle with that because it can be difficult and scary and wondering if we're going to say the right thing. Well, the other thing to remember is that you're just working the field. God's the one who gives the increase. Trust Him to do that. Let Him do the real work. But just join in with Him and be growing in the light of Jesus. For anyone who is not a Christian yet, if there's anybody here, but if there's anybody online too, and you happen to find your way here to this video, I hope that you will see, that you will actually see, rather than continuing to grope in the dark. Your loyalty should be to Jesus, who loved you enough to give His life for you. And because He died, but then rose again, the sun will never set on His kingdom. So be part of it rather than fighting it. So that's the only way to actually win. That's the only way to be welcomed to a home that lasts forever. But you only have so much time to choose. Don't let it run out. Trust in Jesus today to be saved. Now, Christians, we only have so much time too, in a different way. Natural life in this world is going to run out for us, but we know we have the hope that we will be with the Lord after that, and that He gives us everything that we need. But He's doing that now too. He gives us what we need today. So use it wisely, which means using it for His will. We are also fighting a battle, but it's different than Joshua and Israel's. Ours is to save lives rather than taking them. It's to share the word of Christ's victory so that they can stop fighting, so that they can leave the darkness behind. So make that your commitment where you have that light to do it by until the last day dawns and we stand in Christ's light forever.